Yay, we're there.
We made it.
Sorry, I forget that this one is the fun video that Galloway made with all the Aspire triangles that dance around the screen. It's very fun. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Howdy.
If the microphones are not great, let us know now. I have control over the board. We came in, we plugged in, and we got started. So cool. We have a very exciting community stand-up. This is the first one we're doing without John.
we're flying blind.
Yeah.
No,
That's what you mean? Flying blind?
No,
Okay.
we're not blind.
Okay.
We're not blind. We're just slightly shrouded.
But look, the East Coast is here.
It's true. Yeah. Me and Jeff in the house surrounding Damien with our aggressive energy.
I know. It's like
That's right.
I'm on my home turf, but I still feel like I'm a little
Outnumbered.
outnumbered. Outnumbered.
Someone kick Fowler out of the chat. He just said he's here to correct the mistakes.
Oh,
Aren't you
nice.
supposed to be working, dude? Don't you have like a put PR or something? No. Yeah, welcome to the ASP Night Community Stand-Up Aspire Edition,
Okay.
Sure.
which we do once a month, usually the last or so Tuesday of the month. It's
Mhm.
also conveniently MVP Summit Week. So that's why Jeff and I are here.
Yeah, brings us in for a little bit of shenanigans.
Yes, always our favorite.
Mhm.
And so we are going to talk about adding and extending health checks. But first, we are going to do some links. And I need to remember which button to click to share my screen. Here we go. So this is kind of like a meta episode in a way,
Very meta.
because we're going to show you a bunch of links that we pulled from a certain website that we are then going to show you health checks for.
Mm.
Who knew?
Who knew? The website may or may not be aspirify.net, which is the official verb for when you put aspire in an app. It's aspirifying.
Honestly, we were talking about making websites Aspire enabled at .NETConf 2023. We were sitting in the green room over here, and I forget who used the verb. I want to aspirify something, and literally within 10 minutes, I bought the domain name.
Oh, there you go.
Very cool. Very good. Okay. There's a bunch. So I'm just gonna start cranking. A couple of videos. We're not gonna watch people talk to us, even though this is, of course, my favorite Dutchman, Gerald, on the Maui team, who has finally achieved something I have been screaming about long before I even came to the Aspire team. But I finally said, Gerald, I need you to make Maui and Aspire work. And he said, okay, cool. And he did. And now it's probably going to ship in .NET 10 because it was a core change to Maui that had to be made, which is why it wasn't done originally. That and because Damien and Fowler don't know how mobile apps work.
Hey,
So-
I use lots of mobile apps.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
I
Yeah.
know how they work.
But this felt like it was a very good and welcome enhancement because we had the ability to build Windows Forms apps, WPF apps, and connect them into the other things that our .NET Aspire systems were managing.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense to say, well, if I'm building a mobile app, when I'm testing and running locally, I should be able to do the same things.
Yeah. And with Windows apps, it's easy to hit localhost.
Yeah.
When it gets to Android and iOS, hitting localhost becomes a huge pain.
Yeah.
And so Aspire does a lot of that. And what Gerald did was streamlined the dev tunnel setup, which is a request we've had on the Aspire repo for a while too. So the dev tunnel is now what's handling the inter-emulator or phone connection.
Can we talk about what the dev tunnel is before we get too far?
It's a dev tunnel?
It's a dev tunnel.
It's a tunnel on the internet?
There
No,
you
it's
go.
basically like a really fancy port forwarding.
Yes.
That's all it is.
Network configuration goo.
Similar to ngrok.
Yes. That's right.
So, which exists in the Aspire Community Toolkit. But part of the reason the Maui team hadn't jumped on it yet is because they kept waiting for dev tunnels. And they were like, when's Aspire going to build dev tunnels? And I was like, when we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's using I don't even know what the brand is. Is it VS Dev Tunnels or is
I
it,
think so.
what is the actual brand? Jeff, do you know?
Dev tunnels core? No, I don't know.
Maybe? I don't know.
So, but there is a dev tunnel service and a dev tunnel feature as part of like
Yeah.
the Microsoft dev products.
Yeah.
And there's a command line tool for it. So you can like create a dev tunnel by running the CLI. So we always had our eye on like, oh, that'd be cool to enable.
Yeah,
But we've never done it as a first class thing in Aspire
exactly.
yet.
But this is actually, it's pretty crisp. Gerald sent it to a bunch of people a couple weeks ago before he posted this video and was like, try it. And people have been trying it and it's been working.
Oh, good.
The telemetry lights up.
Nice.
It's super
Oh,
nice.
good.
So he has 30 minutes of content here to explain to you how it works.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So I don't need to explain
links,
it.
sample code, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
You might want to lean closer to the mic. They're saying you're not quite as loud as everyone else.
Well, maybe I can just bring the mic a little closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, this was Gerald's first YouTube video in like 2 months because he had 100,000 subscribers and he was like, why bother anymore? Honestly.
Walked off into the sunset, did he?
And so I was very excited. This was the one back. So, okay. Jeff pointed this one out to me by authorized territory, integrating MySQL with .NET-Aspire. And so obviously there are about 8 million different ways to do SQL with Aspire, especially just MySQL in general. But this is a short video. It's only 13 minutes. So that's how I like it. And if you're Damien and you watch everything at 1.5x.
At least 1.5.
Yeah.
That's like the minimum.
It's like what, 8, 9 minutes?
1.8.
Yeah.
2 point.
But right, this speaks towards how you can really do just about any type of database with .NET Aspire now if it's available in a container. Like these things are available for you to freely go grab, integrate, and tinker with, work locally. It's great stuff.
Yeah. And even if you don't want to run in a container, you can always connect to it. You can model it as a connection string rather than modeling it as a database you want to manage. The other thing that a lot of people hit when working with databases in Aspire is you need to think about the database server. So what is the actual server that's hosting your databases? And then what are the actual databases that I'm creating, like the named instances, what schemas inside them, and those type of things. One of the big changes coming in the next version of Aspire is we're actually going to now start creating the actual database instances. So if you model the database, so if you say in your app host, like he's doing here, you say, hey, I'm going to add a Postgres, and then I want to add a database to that Postgres. So Postgres is the server, and then I add like a customers database inside that. Up until now, Aspire did nothing to actually create the customers database for you, other than if we were running in a container, to your point. Some of the database containers, they come from the vendor with the ability to say, hey, what do you want the default database name to be? And then that takes care of creating at least one database. They don't all do that. But often you'll model multiple databases. And so today, you owned that. Like, that was nothing to do with the Aspire modeling side of things. That was like an app consideration. And so you would use EF Core, and, for example, to run your migrations, and that would take care of creating the database if it needed to. But then it's like, okay, great. How do I run my migrations? And there was no built-in support for that either. So we had samples that showed people how to do that. And there were a few different approaches, to your point before, Maddy, like 100 different ways you could do it, because that's just databases. People do different things. But we are taking that step in 9.2 so that we'll start actually, hey, we'll actually go ahead and run the SQL or technically the DDL required to create the database for you. And we're going through systematically updating all the hosting integrations for the different database servers to support that. I think at the moment we've only done SQL Server and Postgres and some of the cloud ones, but then we're going to go through and do that for the other ones over time as well. So that's coming.
We're going to need to standardize all of our integration features.
And so it's kind of a philosophical change for us now. Basically, if we let you model it in the app host, we're going to try and do the work to actually make sure it's there. So that if you modeled it there, we'll actually do the work to make sure it's actually there. But we're going to work on that over time.
So will that also be considered when it comes time to publish?
We need to figure that out.
Gotcha.
So that's because
one step ahead.
The publishing side, if you want to like use all the Aspire deployment stuff, which is totally optional, but if you want to do that, then the question then becomes, great, who's running the DDL script or the SQL script to create the database? Because usually that's how you do that type of stuff, is you use some type of command utility or some custom app or something to run a script that says, create database or create or alter or whatever the statement might be. But Aspire doesn't run during deployment today. Like, it's just something that your app host runs when you're doing in a loop, like as a local developer. And then you might run it once to produce a manifest that you then use for deployment. But there are some changes coming that might tweak aspects of that that will enable us to do some of those things. So cool.
Two cool things about this video I wanted to call out is, if you're on 9.1, you will notice databases are nested now, which is very exciting. So you can actually nest things in the dashboard.
So your zoom in is not coming through to
because I'm sharing the screen. That's fine. Where my mouse is wiggling, there's look at that. You can actually expand and unexpand. Parent relationships. The other thing that's coming in 9.2, which will be out soon, is a very exciting thing that Damien just merged a bunch of
That's
codes
true.
For. And so when you, in this video, they click on this endpoint. Which one? This one, theater mode? Yeah. They click on this endpoint and it opens PHP MyAdmin,
Mm-hmm.
right? MySQL admin. What exciting thing is going to be happening in the dashboard?
Yeah, so we've
soon?
had asks right from the very beginning. People have been requesting, hey, can I customize the URLs that resources show up as in the dashboard, even just for local development? So they don't want everything to be localhost. They may be a more advanced user, and they're either running custom DNS, and so they can have like something.localhost, and that all resolves back to 127 and or to the loopback address, and then they've got custom DNS to handle that. Or they're even doing something like they're editing their host file.
Yeah.
And so they've already got stuff set up where they've got custom SSL certs and all that sort of stuff, and they're fine doing that for dev, but they want it to show up in the dashboard. And so we've finally added the ability to have custom URLs. So basically, resources now, any resource, you can add a URL to the resource, and that will get used when it's shown in the dashboard. That's basically the only thing it's used for right now. Any endpoint that you have, so currently, as you pointed out, Maddy, the column is called endpoints. So when you model stuff in Aspire, you add endpoints to them, which basically is just how you configure networking. It's like, hey, this resource exposes a port, or I want a port, please create one for me. And then this is the URL scheme it's using, and then that will map into a URL automatically. So in the new world, we'll automatically create like URLs in the model for each endpoint, but then you can just add your own, or you can edit the URL that gets created for an endpoint, right? And so then you could have your .NET project that's added, and you could say, yeah, like I don't want it to be localhost, I want it to be foobar.whatever, and I've taken care of setting up my hosts file or whatever I'm doing to do that.
I was going to say, you're not.
No, we're not doing that.
Any of that.
So like, and again, this is about like tiptoeing. So a lot of this is about what we call sequencing, like trying to solve that problem of like, how do I get custom URLs and custom certs locally in one go is like boiling the ocean. That's a very complicated story to like build out end to end. But we Fowler's actually saying, I wrote the code. Yeah, I did write the code. I started with someone else's PR, and then I updated a bunch of stuff. So it wasn't all me. But so we try to like break problems down into smaller steps that have utility on their own, and then we'll build up over time. So in this release, we've got the URLs feature so that you can add custom URLs. But as you just pointed out, you need to make sure that URL like works on your machine. We're not doing that for you. But then we have other stuff that's coming. So we have some work that's ongoing about TLS certs, so that during local development, what if I want to use the ASP.NET Core Dev Cert, which already exists in ASP.NET, for other resources that aren't ASP.NET? So we're doing that work. So we've got some sample code right now in the samples repo that does that for a few of the samples, like for Node and for some containers. But we're going to do that work more formally in the .NET SDK, so that the .NET space dev certs utility will actually create you a cert that works in containers locally.
Oh, right? Good.
That works out really well, because that was one of the blogs.
Yeah, look at that. So we're actually working on this right now. And yeah, so you expect this in a future release after 9.2 is that you'll be able to very easily say, hey, use the dev cert for this stuff, and we'll go and update all of our integrations so that like Redis will use it by default and all the other ones. So yeah,
I feel like I need to tell the story out loud. I was trying to get .NET backend to just run in a container, and I was struggling with the dev certs, and I was like, this is such a pain. Why don't we do this? We really need to fix it. And Damien and Fowler and a bunch of people were like, it's a lot of work, and it's going to be a whole thing, blah, 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 blah. And then Ben on the ASP.NET team ran into it like 3 days later and was like, I'm going to fix it. We'll just fix it. And I was like, excuse me? Here I am told impossible, asking me for the world to change. Ben just shows up and is like, yeah, we'll do this. We'll backboard it.
It's not that it's impossible. It's these things typically, it's a confluence of events takes place.
Correct.
And then that tips you over into, okay, now is the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Because yes, you're right. You hit it that week. Then there was a whole bunch of folks in the community that hit it. And then Aaron on the community toolkit hit it as well. And specifically the example they had was that I want to run this container, but I want it to contribute to OTel. Yeah. So I want this OTel to show up in the dashboard, and they would always fail because the OTel endpoint is secured with TLS using the dev cert. Yeah. And it's like they would all go, I don't trust this cert because it's self-signed, So all these people hit it in the same week. And then Ben hit it because he was building the YARP container, which is currently being worked on.
Yeah.
And it turns out Ben also works on the ASP.NET team who owns the .NET Dev Certs command. So we would go like, you want it to work? Fix it. Go over here and do this work for us, and then that'll help us get the feature to work.
That's great. I started a really important trend, and you're all welcome.
Yes.
Too much time to that.
Right.
Okay. .NET Rocks. It's episode 1942. I don't know when they started doing this, because I usually just skip to the parts that people clip on the internet. They now tell you the events from that year. They must have been doing that for a while.
Yeah, yes. That's only recently, I think.
I think so, but I don't remember them doing it. And then they started telling me, Rich was telling me fun facts about 1942 in the car, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh no.
They started it a few months ago, and it was right. They needed some more content besides what was it? The
Better Know Framework.
Better Know Framework.
Yeah.
Yep. So Rob Richardson came on this one, who's actually here this week at MVP Summit, and I think we're going to meet him, which is exciting.
Good.
Hi, Rob. Shout out. I had first seen Rob talk about Aspire on a YouTube video from the Tulsa user group that Sean Wetzel runs.
Yep.
In December. And I remember we all were sitting there and he was still running the one with the workloads right after 9 had shipped. And we were all like, oh no, we're terrible. We need to fix all our messaging. Like we're letting like actual influencers go out and show old bits.
Yep.
And so when I saw this, I was like, ooh, okay, let's see. And he is totally up to date. Like I was very, very pleased.
Yeah, he's up to date.
And he really like hones in on the open telemetry stuff. Like that's what he gets really excited about.
He's very big on the telemetry stuff. Yeah. Hooking that up particularly to JavaScript is what I'm seeing is his thing.
Yep. So that was a good one to listen to because I never talk about the OTel stuff. I'm like, look, the charts. Yay. And that's about as much as I care. So
it's actually interesting. Like when people talk about the OTel stuff, I think even in that episode, because I listened to it, there was some mention, I can't remember who said it, may have been Richard, but there was this conception that .NET was somehow behind on the OTel stuff and then we were lagging originally and now we've caught up. And I actually think it's complete opposite. Like I think .NET has the best OTel story of any stack so far. Like from what I've seen so far, because I've had to write a bunch of the samples in the Aspire samples repo, hooking up other stacks to emit OTel for their libraries is far worse on Python and Node and a bunch of stuff than it is for our stuff. And so I've noticed that, like, for example, Dino in their latest release, like one of the alternate Node frameworks. Dino now has native OTel built in. That was in their latest point release. They just did that work. So that out of the box, you get OTel. So that's really cool that the other stacks are now following in that sense. And that's actually probably a step above .NET because in .NET, you still have to add the OpenTelemetry libraries to map from the native primitives we have, like the activity source and the meters, into project those as OTel, which is, of course, we do for you in Aspire with our service defaults project.
Right.
And it's not an awful lot of code. It's actually fairly straightforward. But in other stacks, it's often a lot more work.
Yeah.
And the way they do it is interesting, to say the least. And it's all, I mean, I guess it's because other stacks have, different idioms about how you set up this type of stuff. But I found doing it for Node and Python kind of odd. But each to their own.
Dino is the cutest JavaScript framework too. So has
a cool logo.
It does. It's a little bit dinosaur. Okay. This is actually, I think, an older version of this podcast, but just got updated to YouTube because I remember listening to this a while ago. But now it's on YouTube for everybody to hear. And it's with Mitch, who's on our team. If you love Australians and Damien is not enough for you, Mitch will fill the rest of that part of your heart and soul. But Mitch does a lot. I mean, he's been big on the app host side. Now he's working on a lot of the deployment stuff. Sometimes Fowler will just, text us on a Sunday and be like, Mitch just pushed this whole thing into the repo. And all of a sudden everything's cool and new on Monday.
The Sunday afternoon Fowler messages are always interesting.
Yeah. The Monday morning in Australia, Sunday afternoon.
That's right.
Here, it's always a very good time.
Interesting anecdote. Mitch taught me .NET.
Really?
I worked with Mitch.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So like 25. Oh my Lord.
You mean 4 years ago?
24,
5 years ago.
24 years ago, 2001, I went to a .NET boot camp in Australia over like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday when boot camps are a thing. That's how I first learned .NET. And Mitch was one of the instructors. So he worked at the company that was doing the first .NET boot camps in the world at the time. So cool. And so he was part of the group that taught me originally .NET, and then I went and worked for the company 2 years later. And so Mitch and I actually worked together, and then 20 years later, we're working at Microsoft together on the same team. So there you go.
That's why he's so good at explaining things to me.
Because he was a teacher?
Yeah. I was saying right before we started last week, I had to actually go through a proper PR code review from Mitch, and there were like comments. And I was like, man, this is why I'm a PM. Well, not for me, but it was pretty good. And now I have code in the Spire.
Yeah, so that's right.
That's not just string changes, which is new for me in our repo. Okay, another thing, and I'm going to try and wrap the rest of these up really quick so we can talk about Healthchecks, Jeff.
Plenty of time.
Yeah.
Plenty of time.
Integration testing. We did a lot of stuff in 9.1. We're doing more stuff in 9.2. But there was a couple cool things about this article. One is forking the Azure Key Vault emulator, which we had an internal team ask us about last week too. One is using XUnit with Aspire. And then I believe this uses some of the new, where is it? Scroll. Yeah. Just a bunch of cool things. Where's the thing I was looking for? Oh, the website not resolving. That's hilarious. We have this I don't know, Damien, do you want to explain testing? Because you actually built it with Ruben.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to talk about how the app host sucks less now.
Yeah. So like folks who have used ASP.NET Core will know we have this pattern that uses a type called the Web Application Factory, which enables you to effectively new up a instance of your app in your unit test, like directly, and then fiddle with it before it actually starts. And then when you call start, it doesn't start a real server, it starts a fake server. And then you can ask the factory, please give me an HTTP client instance that when I send requests through it will go to the app directly rather than going through the networking stack. And so we were inspired by that kind of general pattern of like, I want to create a version of my app, in this case, an app host, a distributed application, in my test, and then be able to like manipulate the model and then get an HTTP client that lets me send requests to it. Now, in the case of Aspire, there's no network fakery. Like it's actually when you do this in your unit test or your integration test, you create the distributed application test builder factory, whatever it's called. You get an instance, and then when you get a client, it actually spins up all the resources. So your containers run, your .NET projects run. It's all running for real. Locally, obviously. And then when you send requests through the HTTP client, you're actually making real requests. So it's a very easy way to get a proper end-to-end or integration style test actually going over the network, loop back locally, but all encased inside a unit test. So we've been making changes to this as more and more teams inside Microsoft and obviously more external customers are using it and giving us feedback. As it's a really, really valuable way. It's one of the things that's been kind of difficult about these largely distributed systems to date is how do I like run stuff in the context of a test so that I can verify things. So someone in the chat mentioned the test containers project, which is fantastic. And so if you haven't seen test containers, it's a like unit testing extensions framework for .NET that lets you, not just .NET, it's for a whole bunch of stuff, that lets you basically new up containers specifically for the lifetime of a test, so that you can assert stuff against them, which is great.
Have some preloaded data, some preset configurations,
all that type of stuff that you want to be able to do in tests, keep it isolated, all that type of thing. And so so Aspire has an Aspire testing library as well, which you can bring into unit tests, and we have templates for this as well. In fact, one of the things in 9.2 is we've updated the testing templates so you can now use XUnit v3 version 2, because there's now a version 2 of XUnit v3. And that also supports the new Microsoft testing platform. So that's new in our templates coming in 9.2. And so we continue to enhance this as people are giving us
But you know what I'm going to ask? Where I want to go with this is I want to run Playwright.
Yeah.
I've got the entire system set up.
So I can talk to that as well. So there's stuff coming in ASP.NET Core 10 that specifically is about making it easier to use that web application factory with quote unquote real requests, so that I can point something like Playwright at it. So that work is ongoing right now for .NET 10 specifically. We have tests in the Aspire repo specifically that do Playwright testing, and so we know it is actually possible. And then someone in the chat here just asked, any plans of launching the Aspire dashboard during an integration test? And this is something we have talked about. So we actually, Fowler did a deep dive into testing over the holiday period. And this is one of the things that he found is that it would be amazing to be able to grab your test output and then launch the Aspire dashboard just as a viewer, so that you could like help when you debug tests like that failed in CI. So that is not something that we have yet, but it is one of these like longer term ideas that we're working towards and chipping off little bits of features. So that we could get there. So we definitely want to enable that scenario. Either when I'm doing an interactive run of the test locally, I can have the dashboard show up so that when I'm pausing the debugger, I can see stuff in the dashboard. And then the other scenario is that one I just mentioned, which is how can I take test output of a failed test, load it in the dashboard locally as a viewer so that I can look at it.
Oh, so you've got me thinking. The Playwright folks have a tool they use called Allure Reporting, and Allure runs its own web server. So to start that web server and mount it as a .NET Aspire resource in the dashboard and show its endpoint feels doable.
Yep. So
Okay, pretty cool.
Yeah. So good questions. If you haven't looked at the testing stuff, please take a look. Let us know. This actually sample here is good at showing some of the recent improvements we made. So the app.resource notifications, that never used to be a top level property. You had to pull that out manually. It's like a service in the service container, in the DI container. So now in your test, it's extremely common to want to wait for a resource to reach a particular status before you continue with the test, right? Because what's no point sending a request to it if it hasn't started yet. And so now you can very easily do that, like you can see here. This is a very common pattern you see with a custom like cancellation token source or even a custom task completion source. And then you use that in combination with both the resource notification service like this and or the eventing system we have in Aspire now, which is available on builder.eventing, and where you can like hook up callbacks to say, hey, after endpoints are allocated, can you run this code? Or after this resource is started, can you run this code? And so you see that often in tests because you're trying to coordinate like end-to-ends that require like waiting for this thing to occur before you move on. The other thing that's super important in tests is capturing all the log output. So that if something goes wrong, you can actually go and diagnose what went wrong. Because after the fact, it's like, okay,
true.
I can run it under the debugger and I can step through things, but that's not the same. Like sometimes you actually, because this is a highly asynchronous system, there's so many things going on at once. Trying to sequentially debug things often is actually really difficult. What you actually want is just a huge dump of all the logs that took place, and then just to go through it either with AI or just a person to kind of like find the pattern and hone in what it is that you need. So
just a person?
Just a person.
Horrible.
We have been relegated to just.
I know, just.
AI is really good at finding patterns.
It's really good.
Do you want to take a look at this question from Sergey?
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
When adding an web API using builder add project, the port usually comes from the launch settings JSON. When you use with endpoint, though, it adds an additional port rather than overriding. Can we override the port?
Absolutely. So when you call add project, what that add project call does by default is discover the launch profiles for your project by parsing the launch settings JSON file. And then it extracts the application URL setting out of that and projects those to endpoints. If you want to edit one of those endpoints, you've got two options. One is you can call a method that says don't use the launch profile. And say, hey, don't use the launch profile. I'm going to set up everything manually. Or you can call with endpoint and then pass in the name of the endpoint as the first argument, and that will say, I want to edit this endpoint. And then you pass in a callback as the second argument where you write the code to edit that endpoint. The third option is there's an overloader with endpoint that I think lets you get access to all the endpoints. And so you could just like find the one that you want to do and edit that way, but they're mutable. You can edit them even after
the endpoint names are the names of the launch profile.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So like
HTTP, HTTPS.
Well, what they are is not the name of the launch profile. The endpoint name by default is always the scheme and of the URL. So if you like the HTTPS launch profile by default for an ASP.NET Core project, you get two endpoints. You get an HTTPS endpoint and an HTTP endpoint.
Yes.
So you'll have an HTTPS endpoint named HTTPS and then another one named HTTP. It is a coincidence that the launch profiles are also called HTTPS and HTTP. That is just a coincidence. It's not that because a launch profile can have more than one endpoint. So it can't. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Little known fact though, while we're talking about launch profiles, one of the ways that we design the Aspire launch profile sort of system, now that we're talking about it, is that the app host itself has launch profiles. Okay, so the app host project is a .NET project, so it has launch profiles and they are named. They are by default named HTTPS and HTTP.
Right.
Okay, there are two of them, and the default one is HTTPS. The name of the launch profile that you use to launch the app host will automatically be used as the preferred launch profile name for any .NET project that the app host is launching.
I've seen this.
So by default, it's all HTTPS, right? We pick HTTPS and then we look for a launch profile called HTTPS and we use that one on all your projects. But if you want to customize that, you can create like Damien's cool launch profile on the app host.
Yeah.
Also create that on all of your .NET projects, and then you can just select that or run it, .NET run -- launch profile, select it, and that launch profile name will get used for all of the projects being launched. And then if it can't find it, it'll fall back to finding the first one that it finds.
I do that on my Linux workstation. Yep.
Oh,
There you go.
very
Yeah.
fancy.
So if you didn't know that and you were wondering how you could create like different ways to launch the app host and do different things, you can do it that way. Also, last bit on that, we pass the launch profile in as a environment variable so that in your code, you can detect what launch profile you're running as by checking this environment variable, which obviously gets projected into configuration. So you can just say, hey, app.configuration, launch profile name equals blah, do this, otherwise do that. So you have the control of not only editing environment variables and URLs in the actual launch settings file, but you can do code that only runs per launch profile as well. So that's the end of my launch profile rant.
Now I'm going to put some settings in my bash RC to update that.
There you go.
Very smart.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Couple more. One, mermaid diagrams, mermaid exporters. Anthony wrote this from Aspire, which is very cool and nifty.
Hang on. Big applause for Anthony here. The guy writes amazing articles that are thinking just a couple steps ahead of some of the things that we have released to show some of these integration points that are really interesting.
If you want, he's the closest thing to a crystal ball for Aspire features that probably exists.
I was about to say, like, this cracked me up because as soon as I saw this, it was like, oh, by the way, James went and built the resource graph.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
So
this is in the next release of Aspire.
So this is 9.2, which will be coming soon.
Spoilers.
So 9.2 was going to get released today, actually.
Yeah, and then
we punted it a week, just like we did last time, because Fowler's like, there's more we can do.
Yeah, and then
I'm like, okay, let's do more.
Now.
Yeah, so now
April Fool's was too funny.
Oh, it's on April Fool's. Okay, so this is coming in the next week or two.
Yeah.
But yeah, the graph view is one of the things that is coming in 9.2.
But I think Anthony says in here somewhere, and I completely agree. Like having something at publish time is very, very helpful, especially for the like documenting and all that.
Love it.
So now you have both the in runtime dashboard version, and you can do this. And mermaid diagrams have become pretty much the standard from what I see. So
Mermaid's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's
pretty awesome. There's a bunch of really nice like web-based mermaid diagram builders, so you don't have to remember the syntax. You can just there's a bunch of drag drop tools. Yeah. So there's a bunch of like drag drop things out there that'll generate it for you as well.
Really cool.
Feels very Copilot-y that you could Copilot and generate stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so a team that we talked about at .NETConf, we talked about the Copilot app, but we also talked about some folks on Xbox. They had a really good quote that was like, we were able to like go from weeks to minutes with testing our telemetry or something. It was some very good quote. They actually spent some time with folks on Jeff's team, including Katie and John Galloway and some other folks, coming up with this like actually nice in-depth blog about how they leveraged Aspire specifically for the observability stuff they were doing with Xbox, but with their app. And so we're trying to do more and more of these. We're working with the Copilot team as well, because people love to see how Aspire is actually being used and how people are customizing it to fit whatever crazy niche need they had. This one was also cool because they use Cosmos DB. So they talk about the emulator and the new run as emulator stuff that came out a couple releases ago, and lots of good stuff in here. So this is on the dev blogs, Microsoft dev blogs. And then
is it worth calling out? Shall I just say it?
Yeah.
So one of the very valid feedback that we get about .NET products a lot of the time is like, well, Microsoft doesn't seem to be using it for their stuff, hence why would I bother using it? And I understand why people say that. I don't always think it's valid criticism in certain circumstances, because big companies have, Microsoft is kind of a bit of a unicorn. Like for certain types of product use, there's a reason you don't use one thing versus another.
We've hired certain
lots of reasons. Often it's because of like the people you have on the team. Often it's because big teams can handle things differently to smaller teams and so on and so forth. But I am very happy to report that with Aspire, we have lots of internal teams using it. And as Maddy said, we are trying to find, the wins and the stories out of that and extract it out and share it with folks so that they can see how some of the biggest services in the world and some of the most recent and relevant as well, like with Copilot and things, are using Aspire and finding it be really good for their workflow. So we'll continue to try and mine and like find those tidbits, those bits of goodness, and we'll share them as we can. But it's been great for us to have like such close customers that we can rely on and get feedback on, feedback from, and feed it back into the product for everyone else. So
it's fun. And I used to say this on Maui too. It's hard because the .NET team, we're yappers. We'll tell everybody what we're working on all the time. We'll be like, look how we built this thing on GitHub. Most of Microsoft is still very much like, outside of the developer tools world, it's proprietary and a lot of closed source and all this stuff. And so we say, hey, can we write a blog about how you build your app? And they're like,
are we allowed? Can we talk about that?
So, it can also be hard to find these first parties who not only use our stuff, like our stuff, but then want to tell people that they're using our stuff.
And by the way,
it's very cool.
If you have a story about using Aspire or some other .NET thing, and it's helped you, please reach out to us. Because if you haven't noticed, our .NET marketing website, like the homepage of .NET, it has customer testimonials, like a lot of product sites do. And we're always looking for good examles of that. Is that actually a vanity URL? .net/customers?
I have no idea. We're about to find
Should
out.
be. If it isn't, look at that customer showcase.
So
And so by all means, if Aspire is helping you, reach out to us and let us know. Like maybe you could be a guest blogger on the .NET blog talking about your success story.
We do. We need an Aspire tag.
I know. I need to tell Myra. She'll do it. This is really cool. And we have folks on the team who will, work with you and help you.
Yeah.
So, all right. Last thing. Fowler did some stuff with AI. I don't know. It's like fine. It's very cool. It is a ChatGPT clone. And this is the one that he did mostly in JavaScript, right?
Yeah. He set himself a challenge, which was, I'm going to effectively build a chat app and more and more of it, sort of a ChatGPT clone or a Copilot clone.
Yeah.
But he chose to build the front end not in .NET. He did it in something he doesn't know particularly well, which I don't know. Did he use React? It was React.
It was, yeah.
And it started out as JavaScript, and then he changed it to TypeScript. But he actually used AI for a lot of the coding because he's just not a React developer at all.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the front end here was actually built using in a kind of a vibe coding style.
Yes.
But
there it was.
Right. I know. I gotta drop it in there.
Yeah, it's React with Vite and Caddy.
Yep. And Caddy for the front
routing.
for the routing for the front end. Yep. But Aspire, right?
Words.
So the whole thing is brought together using Aspire.
Yep.
And so this has been something one of his app building exercises he's been using to help. He's confirming what we're saying, including the code part, the vibe coding part, to help us figure out like what do we need to do in Aspire to make it better for building apps that aren't just .NET. So this app has some .NET or no .NET.
The back end, the API is .NET.
The API is .NET. The front end is not. Okay, got it.
You could never ask Fowler to write an API and something.
Right, and I think it uses Redis for state.
Yeah.
It uses Olama when running locally for the AI part, and then it deploys onto Azure AI and Azure Cosmos DB. And this is what's great about one of the great things about Aspire is you can read the code here, and I think that's immediately obvious, right? Because you literally, I'm running adds an AI model.
So
with
this
a name.
is like a Fowlerism.
Right. So he was exploring. So he was exploring. We often use app building or samples building for exploring what an API shape might look like for Aspire. So it's like, okay, how could we more deeply integrate LLMs and AI modeling into Aspire itself, rather than just treating it like another integration. And so he created a set of extensions, which were like, okay, what if I just add the AI model as a first-class concept to the app host, rather than saying add Olama and then configure Olama for the model? What if you add the model first, and then you say, I want to run the model using Olama, or run it using LM Studio, or run it using Azure AI? And so you kind of invert the polarity, if you will. What does that allow? What falls out of that idea?
I like this model of coding in the app host. I've been doing more of this on stream because it takes us from those initial samples where everything was just in program CS. And you ended up wanting to put regions in there. To hide and so you could focus on here's just this one thing. But instead using extension methods, pushing them out into other classes, it gets you back into that single responsibility principle of, okay, I need to configure just this one thing, put it in this class file over here. It's only doing my Olama configuration, my database configuration, and all the things that come with it, so that back in my program CS for app host, I can just say configure database.
Mitch, if you're watching this, you know what file I'm talking to you about that needs to be refactored. That's currently 800 lines in the Aspire repo.
So I mean,
vibe coding.
I don't want to get into a whole clean coding debate on here because nobody's using regions.
Guess what?
I can't find anything. I'm not a real developer anymore.
I will speak like personally. I have projects that are 3,000 line program.cs's, and that's totally fine for me. And then I have other ones where I'm like, no, I want this to be 10 lines in program CS, and I have, like you said, a library of extension methods I create, and it's fine. Like, it doesn't have to be dogmatic. It's fine. Do what works for you in that particular context.
The consultants that are out there that are building and talking to large enterprises will show you we'll show you code that will make you shudder.
Well, I mean, but large
Okay.
enterprises often means large teams or high churn teams, and that's
Totally.
why you'll optimize for different things.
Yeah.
So everything is
Absolutely.
a trade-off, and a lot of code is aesthetics,
Yep.
and that means it's subjective. And then as engineers, we try and push objective measures on top of it.
Super nice.
And so that's where we get into these debates about things. But yeah, so like a lot of our samples are written this way too, where
Yep.
we'll, like to your
Yep.
point, you'll start out just like hacking some code in Program CS. And then when you're comfortable with it working, you'll create a file, you'll create an extension method, which, cheat code, a lot of the Aspire public API service and ASP.NET Core public API service you use is actually extension methods
Yep.
that are the sugar that sit on top of the kernel or the atoms, if you like,
Yeah.
which are the actual primitives that the framework provides for you.
Yeah.
And so that's, run as Olama is an extension method, and all the stuff that you're now hosting integrations are extension methods. That's how
Right.
it all gets exposed to you.
So what's really cool about this is exactly how you'd write an integration.
Yeah.
Like this is exactly it, right? And Fowler's also using the run as and publish as kind of model that's
Yep.
newer in 9.1. Because publish is, although it's not actually deploying, but like when you build it, what is it? When you run the app host to get that manifest, like
Right.
Damien said earlier in the episode, how do you actually tell it what to publish as instead of just running it locally in a container or whatever it is? So this is it's a nice little file. Anyways, all right. I have to find my other browser window. And then I'm going to let us spend the last 10, 15 minutes of this talking about health checks, right, Jeff?
Yeah, we can do a little bit of that.
So if you look in that's not the right URL.
It's not the right URL? Yeah, there's a URL in the URL list.
In the URL list, I'll repost that. The last 3 links on there are a link to everyone's favorite website, Aspirify.
Yes.
And then 2 other health check related blogs.
So one's a document from the samples that shows you, hey, if you want to start customizing and adding the Healthchecks UI, right? That's been out there from, is it Zabril?
Zabril, yeah.
Zabril was in here really early on, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yep. I don't know if they're still here.
Really cool user interface. And it helps to surface those health checks, those reports. Hey, my application is running and it's live. And we add those features into your .NET Aspire project. So here's my dashboard for Aspirify, because I run a whole bunch of things in here because I'm a little nutty like that.
Can you show us the website real quick, Jeff? Do you mind?
I happen to have it running locally.
Oh,
because I just started it up here.
that's a great use of Aspire,
Right.
actually.
Ta-da, look, it's running locally. And right, you see all the wonderful articles. And I always have to say this before we go too far into this. I can't share the source code for this because I purchased the design
theme?
for that.
Yep.
So I can't reshare their design. But has all the wonderful articles and things here about what's going on in Aspire. I wired up to Azure Search, so you can search and find other Aspire articles. But right, the default health checks that comes with this is available at /health, and that's so helpful.
in development only, right?
Yes. Right?
Well, the Aspire templates, this is in development only, but I mean, that's just up to your code, right? It's in
Right.
service
Let me
defaults.
see if it isn't.
But there's other things that add health checks when you go and decide to use some of those integrated clients. Right. So when I go and I add in my source code here, because I heavily cache, I add Postgres.
Yep.
I also come further down here and I add where is it?
Redis client, line
cache.
34, and
Yep, there you go. Thank you.
Yep.
So it adds references and those capabilities. I added all my Azure storage stuff because that's where I store the thumbnails.
Yep.
When I add new articles, I put them through a queue so that it knows, go find those articles, make sure that we have thumbnails, generate them, self-host them in a blob. But I can't see and interact with those health checks that actually make sure that everything's connected.
They're all just rolling up to healthy. That's all it does.
Yeah.
And that's the default in an Aspire starter app template. That's what you get in that service defaults project, is it configures an endpoint called /health.
Yep.
And all the health checks that are contributed by the client integrations, which is what you're talking about here.
Yep, it is.
Which are those Zabril health checks. A lot of them actually come from the ASP.NET Core health checks repository, and then the Aspire client integrations just reference those packages directly. We didn't recreate them. We just used all those ones and we updated a few.
And the health checks are so valuable when you're in production and you need to know, oh
Right.
gosh, why didn't that entry get added to a queue?
Right.
Why are my database connections running slow?
Right.
These types of things. So we can start to ratchet this up and make it a little bit more interesting with, and there's the 2 articles, you can find them in the URL list that will help you start adding in the ability to add a health checks resource so you can see that user interface and dive into some of those dependent resources a little bit better. So let me go change branches here to where I've actually gone and added those capabilities. So you'll see it updated my map health checks here.
So we're in your service defaults project right now. So this is the project that's referenced by all of your
service defaults you see over here. Damien has that side of my screen covered up here with chat. There you go. There you go. Now you can see. But you can see it goes through and it's adding this health checks UI URLs information in so that it's exposing a specific endpoint to the health checks UI.
Right.
Now there's just 1 or 2 other things that are added into the mix here that are right here in app host, and I just copied these files in. I didn't make any changes. They're available in the sample code. I encourage you, take a look at the sample code. If you're going to copy things in here, read through and understand what's going on.
Especially because I wrote this code, so you definitely want to read it before you
double check,
use it.
yeah.
Fowler says you come up with a couple bangers every now and again. And,
maybe this is one of them.
This is pretty close.
I don't know.
Like, this is something where I think we're almost there to wrap this up and turn it into an integration. And it uses a really good example of how the lifecycle hooks work.
Yes.
You spoke about that briefly earlier.
Yeah.
Where, right, if I go back to thinking about filters in ASP.NET MVC, where you want an event to run before the request is handled and an event to run after it's handled.
Right.
Same thing here. I want something to happen before the service has started, and I want something to run after it's been configured. And in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to create environment variables that are appropriate. Stop showing me my tooltips there, but create the environment variables that specify here's the endpoint that has the health check that we want to listen for.
Right.
So it creates these environment variables, and you can see down here that it adds those in, and it appropriately pivots very nicely to the full address of the location that it's going to monitor.
Yeah.
There's a couple extensions that are added in here as well that go and do some of the other configuration bits that we need. But what this gives us then, after I add, I didn't have to modify my code at all. I just updated my app host, my extensions.
Your service defaults.
My service defaults, I'm sorry, service defaults extensions. I remember the name of the class there, and I keep confusing it. So now you'll see I have a health checks service that starts here. And I now have the health checks UI. Nothing's here yet because the website isn't running. So it's polling every 10 seconds. But we'll see it pop up in just a second here.
So to be clear, this is a container image that is published elsewhere. This is owned by the ASP.NET Core Health Checks project on GitHub. It's not owned by us. And then all I did was write an Aspire integration that brings in this container and then a bunch of configuration glue that says, okay, well, you've added this to the app host, but now which of the other resources or projects, in this case, ASP.NET Core projects, do you want this one to monitor? And then it configures those projects by injecting environment variables, like you said, and so that they show up inside this container. So this is actually an interesting example of an integration that's kind of two-way. Like both resources have to kind of configure each other for them to work.
So let me come back to the app host and show that in a minute. I want to make sure that I call out here that just with the existing health checks that are in Program CS with the clients, I'm getting my database context that goes out to Postgres, my 3 Azure storage entries, and then the Redis connection. It's testing and making sure that all those things work and rolls up to the entire website is healthy.
Exactly.
So what you were referring to there, and I want to make sure I call out and show here, because it's really cool how you built the integration here on lines 69 through 71 here. I'm saying add web health checks, add health checks UI, give it the name of the service like we do for all our Aspire resources, wait for the website, and then with reference to the website, it turns that into the environment variables that health checks UI parses to say, oh, here's the various services I'm listening to.
So if you had more than one ASP.NET Core project in this solution, which you don't in this case, but if you did, you could have multiple with reference calls. So line 72 and 73 could be with reference to some backend web API, with reference to some other ASP.NET Core app, and then they would now also have their health checks being monitored by the Healthchecks UI, because that one with reference call would be configuring them. So if you actually put your cursor on with reference and go to definition,
we can do
F12 or right mouse click. So this is part of the code that I wrote. So this is a custom overload of with reference. So you can see that the generic is closed. So line 46 and line 47, rather than those T's being open generics, is actually where the builder is for a Healthchecks UI resource, and the target, line 47, is a project resource. So I've got a concrete overload of this with reference pattern, this method that we have that you see everywhere. And then I go and say, okay, this is a new monitor project. That's just a thing I made up for this integration. It's just a type to store information about, we need to monitor that project over there. Add that, and then that lifecycle hook that you talked about, it goes and finds those monitored projects just at the point that everything is starting up, extracts all that information out again at startup time, and then configures both the projects being monitored and the Healthchecks UI container so that it knows which ones to monitor. It's all that, it's that dance about coordinating everything, but it's all just a bit of C# code. It's not very complicated.
But it's a great example, to your point, of when you need that more complex interaction that needs to synchronize information back and forth between two resources. This is a very interesting pattern that enables that to work for you. Last thing I wanted to show to your point was the environment variables that were passed in to the health checks. So of course I can always view details over here. And if I scroll down, you can see right here, the environment variables that it created, and it's Healthchecks UI, and it's a JSON format is what the Healthchecks UI is looking for. It wants to be passed in a name and a URL, and you see it's going to host Docker internal because it's running on the internal. This is running inside of a container, and it needs to reach outside the containers into the host to be able to interact and get that health information.
And by the way, this is just service discovery. So what you're seeing here is the standard service discovery stuff that we built as part of Aspire early on, Microsoft extensions.http.service discovery, whatever it's called. And so that format of resource name or service name underscore, some index ordinal, because you could have more than one endpoint, and then other metadata there, that's all just the standard service discovery stuff.
The last thing that I want to show here is this bit here, UI path.
Oh, it's not actually. I just said something wrong. I just realized that's not service discovery. That is configuring the Healthchecks UI container. That's its configuration scheme, but it does look a lot like it.
But the generation, the collection of the address there,
that's
you're emulating what the service discovery
does.
Technically,
I mean, they kind of separate. Like we could get into the real details there. We use the term service discovery to refer to like lots of things in Aspire, but service discovery, in my point of view, is specifically the library that we built under the extensions namespace that does that adds a type that injects itself into HTTP client factory so that you can say, talk to that service by name, and then it figures out the addresses. This, I think, is actually that container has a built-in configuration scheme, which is you need to tell it, like, what things am I going to be monitoring? And the way you do it is by this environment variable naming syntax. That's what that part is.
I'm referring to
and then the address here,
the generation of
that's
that
an
address.
Aspireism. So Aspire has this thing where when it has endpoints, it will give you a different address depending on if you're talking to it from a container or not from a container. And that's that part there. Specifically, it's that host resolution about do I need the Docker URL, the Podman URL, or the localhost URL?
Now, the last bit that I want to talk about here that I didn't go into as part of this demo that I was putting together is the UI path. You're hinting at something here that I think folks need to appreciate, because there's always this idea of, I want to brand it so that it looks appropriate for my team. We have a standard look and feel of things. And the folks who built, the Zabrel folks built that UI so that you can inject your own CSS, inject your own HTML. So what you're hinting at here is you could put those files on disk somewhere, mount the volume, and tell it here's where to go to get the CSS. And there's other parameters you can pass in that specify here's the style sheet to use, here's the logo to use, so on and so forth. So that if you do want it to look custom to your organization and it doesn't look like the stock stuff, you can do that. You don't like the green and whatever, fine. You want to make it whatever color, you can do that.
The key cloak container is very similar as well. So we have a preview integration for that. There's a sample for that that's in a branch. It's not in the main samples repo yet, but it's in that repo but in a branch, and it's very similar in that you can configure the container with custom stuff by just like bind mounting a bunch of stuff, like you said, assets, and then setting a bunch of environment variables.
Yeah. So really cool that those features are available to you. And this is something that in our conversations before we started the stream here today, I feel like building the health checks is something that as a developer, it should be something standard that you think about anytime you implement that I-hosted service interface. You've got a service that's running on a task, a thread behind the scenes, bring along iHealthCheck at the same time so that you know what that service is doing. And then this user interface will give you that insight as to what's going on, and use those descriptions, throw exceptions on there as well with the health check report so that you know what's going on. You don't have the insight and you don't want to go digging through logs. Having this available, I think, is a tremendous resource that folks should really start considering as the complexity of their application systems goes up.
Certainly huge bang for buck in terms of like if you want a dashboard to quickly throw up to sort of monitor the health. These health checks exist already. You know, to underline the point you made, Jeff. When you added the integrations for Azure Table Service and blobs and queues and Redis, you didn't have to do anything.
Nothing.
The Aspire integrations brought those health checks in by default. It's just that none of that data was exposed. It was all hidden behind that /health. Yes, you're healthy. And the health checks UI container exposes all that information. Now, we didn't talk about security. Like the sample says it, a big bold disclaimer, don't make this thing available publicly. You would want to secure this behind some reverse proxy or something would be the easiest way to do that. Throw a reverse proxy resource in or use network-based security, whatever it is that you want to do.
Don't expose that port.
Sure, but if you're deploying, and then it all gets into, that's fine, but then how do I see it?
Sure.
Right. So if you want to, it doesn't have much utility unless you can look at it, but the people that you don't want to be able to look at it can look at it. So, that's the thing you have to solve. But you should be able to throw something up in front of it and do security without much hassle. So,
famous last words. But
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right.
Sweet. So, well, that was pretty good timing.
Yeah.
We hit the post.
I'll say that was a nailed it situation.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
All right.
Thanks everybody. We will see you in a month. Hopefully 9.2 will be out by then.
We'll have a release by then.
Yep. Hold on. I'll
change back to full camera. There we go.
Hopefully, God willing, Fowler doesn't try to put anything else in 9.2 and it does in fact ship before then.
Maybe we can figure out a way to have another one of these for the release.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. We should.
Sounds like a plan.
Totally should. And if you're here on campus for MVP Summit or you're joining remotely and you're an MVP, feel free to say hi. If you're not.
Or don't.
If you're not,
that's up to you.
You know how to find us via YouTube now. So that's exciting.
That's right.
Or wherever else, Twitch.
Twitch
I have
TV,
promised Jeff that we would pair program on his Twitch now. Like 4 times. And I've yet to schedule that. So that will also be happening.
We've got a couple of fun applications that there's something that you're building. I've been working on an advanced chatbot that uses AI. I've been geocoding with Olama.
Oh, nice.
Ooh.
Right? That's a thing. So
sweet.
Abdul asks, when is the tentative release of Aspire 9.2? It's imminent. It was going to be today, and then it got moved to next week, but then we realized next Tuesday is April Fool's Day.
Yeah, and I think
maybe we'll just do it next Wednesday. I don't know. We'll figure it out. It's going to be very soon.
Some of our vendors have like the people who do our UI testing also, they have holidays.
Yep.
That don't always line up with our releases. So we pushed it, and then it was like, well, can we actually get it?
We'll figure it out. It'll be soon. It'll be less than.
You can just use the nightly.
More than 1 week, less than 4 weeks.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, but that's a great point.
Very good.
The nightlies are available. Check them out.
Yeah.
File issues, send along feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's always available to you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. See you in a month or less. Bye.
Bye. Take care, friends.